Okay, it says it's recording.
Yep, yep, that's what mine says too. Okay. Hello, everybody. Okay, my name is Dr. Paul Viminitz. Apparently, I'm going to be the moderator for whatever of this little meeting. What we have here is we have a Francis, two Marks, and a Kirsten, and myself. What I was going to propose, unless there's any objections to that, is that, you know, we get these kind of vague references to what's going on with the other four people in this group, but I think I for one, would like to get a little more detailed knowledge about exactly what each one of us either has faced or is facing right now, so that it isn't just some kind of a vague, you know, something all that vague. So if you don't mind, I'd like to start with whoever wants to go first. Mark Hecht, do you want to tell us about your experiences? You know, I mean, you know, like whatever you can say in about, let's say, 10 minutes or something max.
Oh, sure. I can say it in less time than that.
Okay, you're done. Okay, next.
Well, first of all, I think it's kind of interesting that the National Association of Scholars has been tracking cancel culture in the United States and Canada. And I think, well, a few of us are on this list. I might have been the earliest one in our group.
I think so, yeah.
September 2019, I was put on the list. And Francis was put on in 2020, same month, September, so 1 year later. And I think Mark Mercer might be put on the list soon if that's the way things are going. Anyway, okay, so my background is that I wrote an op-ed, and I was working at Mount Royal University for, well, I'd been working there for 10 years, a little over 10 years.
You were a sessional, right, at the time? You weren't.
I had no security in terms of tenure or unlimited wealth.
Right. Okay.
So, yeah, I wrote an op-ed. It went into the Vancouver Sun. The editor there actually wrote back when I submitted it and said, "Oh, this looks interesting." So it went into the weekend edition, and almost as soon as it went up, Twitter exploded, and I got called the usual things: xenophobic, white national, racist, all that. Anyway, the piece is just simply pointing out what the social science data already says, which is ethnic diversity erodes social trust.
Right.
And I kind of used an allegory of Denmark and how it's had a large number of immigrants, especially from Muslim countries, how they're having some trouble with integration and how that's concerning them, and how that may or may not be eroding social trust. Anyway, so then I got canceled in terms of, I was already leaving Mount Royal to go and move to a sunnier climate in Victoria. Well, maybe not sunnier, warmer.
No, it's not sunnier. Victoria is not sunnier than Calgary.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, that's true. I should clarify that as a geographer.
Warmer. Why don't we just say warmer, okay?
Warmer, it's warmer. And anyway, but I was still going to do a field school that I'd been setting up and was officially on the books. So I'd go back to Calgary every spring and run this field school. Anyway, that conveniently got canceled by the administration a few weeks after I wrote this op-ed and after it gained notoriety. So anyway, I left Mount Royal, and I think the administration at Mount Royal was pretty happy to see me go. And then I moved to Victoria, and I guess it's not a direct canceling, but I applied for a position with the Navy Reserves. And the application was almost complete when I got a letter from the commanding officer at HMCS Malahat saying, well, based on your expressed views in the Vancouver Sun in September 2019, we don't want to hire you. and that I've apparently violated Canadian Human Rights Act sections in there, which is a specious argument because I haven't.
How could you explain how are they saying you violated the Human Rights Act?
That I was, that I had views that expressed contradictions with their policies of diversity, inclusion, and tolerance. That's about as far as it went. I guess one of the problems with being canceled is you
never know what you're,
you never know what you're actually accused of because nobody actually says this is what you're officially accused of.
Right. Okay.
So that's kind of where I'm stuck. Anyway, that's my story.
Okay. And what are you doing now?
I have set up a tutoring company.
Mhm.
It's actually geared more for those people that want to have their kids in a more conservative or even a classic liberal tradition, as opposed to, I would call it, being indoctrinated in the current university setting. And then I'm also doing a fair amount of writing for a number of publications, from Ario Magazine to Merriam West to Canadian Journal and so on.
Good.
So I found a new niche, I guess you could say.
Now, in your article, as I recall, it seemed to me you were simply making a sociological observation that in fact diversity does undercut trust. But I'm not sure that you were saying that trust is the one and only desiderata with respect to an immigration policy. I mean, there might be other, desiderata like communitarian, concerns and so on and so forth. You could imagine, for example, a community that has that's desperately in need of financial investment, and the only people who can do that will be, let's say, ethnic Chinese that are going to come in from Hong Kong, and they're going to invest, bring their money with them. And you might say, look, I know that's going to undermine social trust, for at least for some period, maybe even for another generation, but God damn it, we need the money, right? So I'm not sure that your position was that this is a trumping argument against diversity in immigration. I don't think it was it?
No, not at all. The research essentially says, and it's almost common sense, that every society can handle a little bit of ethnic diversity. And in fact, a little bit of ethnic diversity encourages innovation with new ideas and new perspectives and so on.
Well, yeah, could you imagine England without curry houses?
Exactly.
Exactly.
But if you take it too far, then there's a certain tipping point where the benefits are no longer outweighed by the negatives of disruption or divisiveness in society.
So you were talking about Denmark. You used that as a test case. Would you take a similar position with respect to Canada?
In terms of the basics framework? Yeah.
But do you think that the similar kind of threat to social trust is happening in Canada?
Canada is particularly good at integrating immigrants. We're actually probably one of the best countries in the world in terms of doing that.
I'd say so, yeah, because, right.
And so there's actually some great research. A fellow out of the States who's now at the University of Oslo looked at the difference in response between European countries that had empires and those that didn't.
Ah, right, okay.
So the United Kingdom, for example, which had the Great British Empire, tends to be more open to larger numbers of immigrants. Denmark, which had a smaller empire, almost non-existent, actually has probably the most reticence about having immigrants. And strangely, the ones that didn't have an empire at all, like Finland, are somewhere in the middle. How you explain that, I don't know, but it's an interesting observation.
Yeah, it is. Very good. Okay, thanks, Mark. Can we go now to the other Mark?
Sure, yes. I write to administrators at my university quite often, criticizing what they're doing, what they plan to do. Now, you may remember that in October at Ottawa U, and it's another Ontario university, professors who said the word nigger out loud in class were hit by complaints from students and the like. So I wrote...
Professors, wasn't it just that one woman, or was it more than one?
There were 3 people.
3? Okay.
Yeah. Vrushka Lieutenant Duval was the first, but then following her, there were 2 other cases at a different university.
And also Concordia, but even before that, Mark, there was the case of the professor about referring to Pierre Vallière's book, quote unquote, White Niggers of America. That was even before the University of Ottawa situation.
No, that's true. I'm just referring to these specific three cases were the ones that I was communicating to my university about. But it's happened before, it's happened since. So SAFS wrote a letter to the University of Ottawa about the Rushka Lieutenant Duval case. And we criticized
to that letter, did we not? Did we all got a copy of that letter, I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Go ahead, Mark.
We all SAFS sent this letter. It criticized it criticized what Ottawa U did, what officials at Ottawa U did and said after the complaint. For instance, they put the course on hiatus while they tried to figure out what to do. I wrote to about 13 administrators, academic and non-academic administrators at St. Mary's, and copied this letter. And in my message, I made 4 points. One, that Ottawa U reacted badly to this, and then second, I corrected some mistakes that had got into the published reports about this incident. For instance, the professor was never suspended. The term suspended was applied to putting the course on hiatus, and that was interpreted by journalists to mean that the professor had been suspended. So I wanted to correct the record. I described how I thought a university should respond to student complaints in such cases. And finally, I expressed my fear that were something similar to happen at my university, St. Mary's University, our administration would react no better than the administration at Ottawa U did. Well, here we are. What irony.
So what happened?
And in that message that I sent to the administrators at St. Mary's, and along with the copy of the SAFS letter, I gave some instances where St. Mary's had reacted badly, especially complaints, things about racism. And one involved one of my friends here at St. Mary's, and I mentioned her name in the letter, in the message. I copied that message to the people at Ottawa U and one at University of Montreal, who were in newspapers. I mean, they've spoken publicly about these things. Then a week or so later, when it happened at the other university, I sent the same message to people associated with the department at that university who had written a statement and posted that statement on their program's website.
And that other university was Windsor? Was it Windsor?
Well, yes, but I don't want to say so. They seem a litigious group, and and I think their litigiousness is directed at harassing people as much as try to get any sort of justice. So I don't want to give them any reason to start up again. I don't think it really matters. I mean, this could have been anywhere. But anyway, yes, it was the University of Windsor. There were 2 professors there and members of a program at the university, drawing on professors from different departments, posted a response. And I thought that my message, the message that I had sent to the administrators at St. Mary's, critiqued the core ideas in that response. So I sent it to them. At the bottom of the response, by the way, they said comments welcome, something to that effect. I think they say feedback. Everybody says, I say comments. They said feedback, and I wasn't going to play my guitar at them. So I sent it thinking that, well, indeed, it was invited. Feedback, welcome. Any rate, that was late October. I think it was 7 November or 2 November, around that I get a letter from my university summoning me to a disciplinary meeting. There had been at least one complaint, and it turns out there was at least one complaint from St. Mary's University and at least one complaint from the other university. that I had, well, the allegations were that I had violated provisions in documents, university documents, Senator Groove documents about respectful treatment and promoting a climate of respect on campus. Well, it turns out that by sending the letter that included that word, I had, I sent it to these people because I thought that at least they'd be interested, and if they're not, they can simply delete it. But they were members of the academic and non-academic staff. The non-academic members of the non-academic staff were those who do have the president's ear, who are active in topics such as anti-racism on campus and the like. So I didn't think it was inappropriate to send them to them. But it seems that by failing to condescend to someone, I treated that person with disrespect. I mean, if I had left this person off the list, that would have been condescending, I think.
Yeah, you can't win, so. Yeah.
So, but the other university, three members of the people who had posted that that response to the events at their university wrote back to me, and were, I thought, engaging in discussion. Two of them I were asking much the same thing. You know, how dare you print this word in our presence? And so I said, well, is it true that the site of this word, even when mentioned, has these effects? And one of them responded to me by sending me a video, a rap song where you know, nigga comes out all the time. So I'm not too sure what to make of that, but I think it's that some people may speak it in some context and others may not. I think that was the point. At any rate, that person had a law professor at that university file a formal complaint with my university for harassment. And I think it comes down, if the union's lawyer is to be is correct about this. I failed to note that I was being told not to respond. Now I've gone through these messages, and it seemed to me to be a debate. It seemed to me that my interlocutors were disagreeing with me about a matter, but I don't see anywhere where I was being directed to do or not to do anything. And in any case, the person who filed the complaint had responded to me. So I mean,
I guess eventually we'll have to defer to Kristen to ask this question, but I take it that if I engage in a conversation with you and you know, on the email, and then you say, Paul, please don't continue to correspond, and I do continue to correspond, I suppose that could be interpreted as some kind of harassment, Kristen, is that right?
It depends on who you ask, really. I mean, in all of the harassment policies, there's kind of the first step in the process, right? If you feel that someone's harassing you, you should get in touch with them and, you know, exercise some agency. Yeah. But the thing that they need to be engaging in ought to fall under the definition of harassment, right? And now we've moved into an era in universities where ideological disagreement is the harassment, right?
Yeah. Okay.
And it's coming from one side. It's coming from the cultural Marxists who are interpreting words as causing harm to them, right? Rather than ideas with which people can disagree.
Okay.
We'll
We'll get back to you later about some of these legal.
Okay.
I would ask that. But Mark, you want to finish up what you're saying?
Well, just for my point, I couldn't for the life of me see it as harassing at all. I don't think I was disrespectful in the least. At any rate, at most, this is a minor annoyance, and it didn't go on, right? It stopped there. I was summoned to a meeting. I said I couldn't I couldn't come to that meeting in person because I'm in Montreal.
The Zoom thing, right? You can't. We don't meet in person anymore anyhow. Right?
And so I said, well, let's do it by Zoom. But apparently they thought I was canceling the meeting. And so the the two union representatives, me and the union lawyer, show up for a meeting, and we're asking, well, where's the Zoom link? And find out that they canceled. So at any rate, they set up another meeting. Oh, and by the way, they set up the second meeting on the very last day the collective agreement allowed them to have a meeting, because there's these timelines. And they informed me about it on the very last day that they could do that. So we had this meeting. It lasted about 45 minutes. I have a lawyer, and she was there, and she kept insisting, well, what are the passages in these documents you're alleging he breached? And no, there was nothing there. I can't find in any of the documents any statement or any directive that I breached. I find repeated words that protect the sort of activities I was engaged in, that say things as direct as offense is a constant possibility of academic life. It doesn't itself amount to harassment. And moreover, there's the collective agreement. The collective agreement itself says that it supersedes all other documents, and the collective agreement has quite strong academic freedom protections, including explicitly criticizing the university. Right. Moreover, the collective agreement says that the university is not to infringe on our charter rights on civil liberties. So a private citizen may send these a message such as the message I sent, and so yeah. So I think I'm covered everywhere, and yet the meeting, the physical meeting ended, and I didn't realize that indeed the meeting hadn't ended. That it was still being carried on, so that the two lawyers could meet each other and try to find a resolution outside an informal resolution. So I'm counting the days. I think, well, 20 working days have passed, and I've heard nothing, not from the union's lawyer, from the union, or from the university. And so I wrote a letter to an email message to the university's lawyer saying, look, haven't 20 days passed? Isn't this up? And he says, well, no, the meeting's still continuing. I said, well, have you met? And he said, no, we haven't. Have you been in touch? No, we haven't. So at any rate, I said, well, wrote him an email message and asked if he would contact the university's lawyer and see what was happening. So he did, and then a week later, I received a message from him saying that they'd spoken, and now I'm to have a meeting with the union's lawyer and the two union executives on Monday. What will happen at this meeting, I don't know. It might be that the university wants me to do X, Y, and Z, and if I agree to do that, it's gone. It might be that the university is about to issue discipline. So I don't know. There are things I can't do, even if the university asks me. What I fear, of course, is that if the university decides to discipline me, our union won't believe it. And then I might be in the position of having to sue the union. So we're looking at labor lawyers. In any case, I can't imagine that discipline would consist in anything more than a letter of reprimand. A letter of reprimand for what? I don't know. I haven't done anything wrong. Not only have I not done anything wrong, I haven't.
The thing about a letter of reprimand that goes into your file is that nothing prevents you from writing a letter of rebuttal to a letter and insisting that it go in your file.
Oh yeah, no, and I would do that.
You would, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
So it's questionable whether the letter of reprimand would do any harm to you, because then it just becomes, you're arguing, you and the university are at odds over the issue. Well,
the big problem though is progressive discipline. That's what happened to Pine. I think his name's Derek Pine from Thompson Rivers. is that he did something completely innocuous and in fact, he should have been defended. But then he tagged his faculty association members on Facebook, and now he's been suspended without pay and he can't get into his computer because they're claiming it's progressive discipline, and he was in the process of going after the first incidents. And so it just kind of starts to spiral out of control with this progressive discipline. That's the big problem.
Right. Okay, Mark, carry on. Are you almost
Oh,
done?
yeah, just final comments. I want this to be over one way or another because I want to write about it. I want to make it public. Some of my informal writings of late have alluded to to these things, and I send them to the administrators that are on the distribution list. So it might be over on Monday. With nothing. Maybe I'll be asked not to send someone email messages, and I'd agree to that, though I don't think my union should let me. I would protest my union allowing me to do what I'm willing to do.
Yeah.
So it might end there. The university might issue a letter of warning, which doesn't actually count as discipline, and so it can't be grieved. But the first actual piece of discipline is the letter of reprimand, and so I might get one of those. But one way or another, I do want to comment on all this. But Francis's point about progressive discipline is important. I mean, suppose I agree to something and I hand them the Danegeld, and then they come after me anyways, right? So, because I think this thing has been capricious and lawless. And so I don't know that I can accept that any deal that's worked out will be honored by my university. I was terribly surprised and disappointed and angry because I had no idea that our two chief administrators, the president and vice president academic, were like this. The only thing I can imagine is that they really do want to send a signal of their commitment to specific people, specific groups on campus, and they got to get something out of this from the person who claimed to have been offended. So rather than tell her to talk to me, or rather than talk to her about how academics behave, they have to show that they're on the side of anti-Black racism as understood in contemporary social justice movements. Because again, what I did counts as an act of anti-Black racism on this view.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of this stuff is just collateral damage, right? It's not like anybody gives a shit about you personally, right? That we want to, go after Mark. It's that the signal has to go to other people, and you just happen to be.
Well, that's true. That's true. I did think they would care at least a little about me. Well-known, well-respected professor.
Yeah, well, you're not at all as vile as Francis, for example, is just vile, right? I mean, but you're not. I mean, everybody knows, Mark Mercer's kind of a nice guy.
Yeah. So that's what they tell me.
Much the way that Francis is not, So.
Anyway, that's my story.
Okay, Francis. After I've been now that.
Yeah. So.
Ledger itself. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I think this is so true about Mark. Mark, that was what took us all by surprise, was that Mark was this very kind, just seeing the best in everyone type of guy. So
look at that face, everybody.
That was the shock. That was the thing that really was very, very, difficult. But anyway, so me, on the other hand, I have been involved in dust-ups, what I call dust-ups. I usually have about one dust-up a year about various things, and they've been increasing in intensity. So I'm quite prepared. Like, I'm very psychologically prepared for when things are really just going to become completely unmanageable. But things were not like that until 2020. So before 2020, it was sort of like the yearly dust up, and you know, administrators they wouldn't do anything, and it was kind of recognized this was the nature of the beast. And things changed very to the worse in 2020, largely surrounding the killing of George Floyd. I guess that's really when it was noticeable. Things just kind of went in a completely different dimension. So nothing had really happened until that point. And what occurred at that point was there was a statement made by our faculty association, the Mount Royal Faculty Association, and the administration, making all sorts of polemical claims about Black Lives Matter, especially the Faculty Association, which was a particularly bad public announcement. I was very upset about that. And one of my colleagues, Sinclair McCrae, who's a philosophy professor, and again, a Mark-like character, very kind, always wanting to see the best in everyone else. He wrote this incredibly articulate open letter to both the Faculty Association and the president of Mount Royal, outlining why this was not the right thing for both the Faculty Association and Mount Royal University to do. So I thought, thank goodness he's just, you know, and he really laid it all out, the case. Now this is gonna hopefully
he was a bit long-winded, I thought, you know, I mean, he doesn't write in that first kind of way, you know?
He was trying to show his goodwill in this, and you kind of like, if you're going to try and do this and enter into this hornet's nest, you know, that's, I think, the one hopeful way that it can happen. Anyway, everyone, the Faculty Association, the president, just ignored this and didn't respond. And then 62 of my colleagues wrote an open letter, signed an open letter saying that we should have mandatory anti-racism training and all sorts of things like this. And I thought, the only way I can deal with this is through satire. This is not rational. This is not rational anymore. So I wrote this satirical letter saying that I could not, first of all, George Orwell came to me in a dream, and he told me that although he knew I was a fan of his work, this was wrong, and it was actually intersectional postmodernism. That was the right way forward. And then I told my colleagues that I could not sign their letter because that was actually a white oppressive act to do this, because Emile Zola was a privileged cis-het man, and I just like, blah, blah. Anyway, so I posted this on my Twitter account.
This is as Francis Widdowson or as McGrath?
I hadn't yet created Francis McGrath at this point. I was still Francis Widdowson. Okay. Anyway, so I posted this on my Twitter account, and then I developed this intersectional analysis of the 62 members, faculty members, and gave them oppression points for whether they were white, cisgendered, full professor, because of course they're privileged in that way. And there was about 40% were full professors as well, quite privileged members. And I said, if they really wanted to be principled in their activism, they should resign and make room for the BIPOCs. Right. This was the way to go. Anyway, this was not. I inked out their names. I didn't have their names. I just did it and then inked out their names. So I wasn't. Anyway, this really got us, the student. So there was this student group, well, alleged student group, anonymous, racial advocacy MRU, that got really angry about this and started a bit of the agitation. So things were already a bit primed already. And then the Wendy Mesley case began to unfold. And Wendy Mesley, for people who are unaware of that, was a very, very well-known CBC journalist. And she basically has had her career ended because she, again, following on Mark's situation, had mentioned the word quote unquote nigger, both in terms of a quoting someone else and also referring to Pierre Vallière's book, quote unquote white niggers of America. And the second one, the title of the book, I just could not believe this was the case. And so I started railing on it, and still is Frances Widdowson on Twitter, about how this was terrible. And I made sure when I was talking about it that I never mentioned the word, because I knew this was going to be a problem. So I avoided using the word. Anyway, so at one point there's this troll, anonymous troll on Twitter, who had a few weeks earlier complained to Tim Raleigh, the president, asking whether Mount Royal's slogan, "You belong here," whether Frances Widdowson was the person, whether they belonged here because of my supposed transphobic and anti-Indigenous views. So I knew this person was trying to set me up, and they asked me, if the word is so benign, why don't you use it, was the question. So I kind of looked at that, and then I saw that Wendy Mesley, CBC were included in these tag elements. So I thought, if I'm going to be principled about this, I should just put my money where my mouth is. And so on Twitter, I said, there's nothing wrong. The word does not have spiritual power. There's nothing wrong with, mentioning the word in a quote. And I quoted a Wikipedia article and attached the Wikipedia article. And then I said, or the book title, Pierre Vallière's quote unquote white niggers of America. And I attached the book title, a screenshot of that. Anyway, so I was waiting. I knew this was going to be not good, what was going to happen. But surprisingly, the troll was actually trying to engage me in a conversation about this, and nothing happened. But I wasn't wanting to engage in a conversation with anyone about this. I just wanted to show, here's when it's okay to do this. So everything was fine until July 30th, when one of my Indigenous colleagues, who's obviously been annoyed about me being at Mount Royal and what I've been doing for the last few years, retweeted this MRU racial advocacy stuff that they were doing on Instagram. There was some mobilization against me on Instagram, and she congratulated this student group and said, here's a great student group that is mobilizing, is going after a professor who's hiding behind academia to spread racist views. So this is what this professor did. And when I saw that, and the other thing is, it was liked, that tweet was liked by 6 other professors and the MRU education Twitter account. So not just individual professors, education, like the actual MRU, official MRU education account. So I thought, whoa, I don't like this at all. This is a mob that's starting to form. So I had some discussions with other people about what I should do. And I decided that I was gonna take out the shotgun and, fire a shot over the bow. And I said, basically, is it appropriate for these 6 professors to be liking, and the MRU education account to be liking, an attempt by another professor to mobilize students on the basis of this setup by a troll? Is this appropriate? And then that's when all hell broke loose. And I fought all day on Twitter about this. With them, and it was completely irrational, and I just I fought and fought and fought, and then I thought, again, these people are totally irrational, so the only thing that's going to work in this is satire. So anyway, at that point I said, I hadn't gone to the satire route, but I said in a tweet something, I called myself a quote unquote cunt. I said, this cunt, attention, politically correct totalitarians, this quote unquote cunt will not feed you, which is the crocodile reference, Winston Churchill crocodile reference. It is right to defend Wendy Mesley, don't pander to race hustling crocodiles in racial advocacy MRU or MRU anti-racism. Anyway, this then led the faculty anonymous Twitter account MRU Racism, Anti-Racism to jump into it. And so I was just watching this going, this is just total. Like, I thought that kind of strong statement to them would get them to back off. I am not going to pander to you guys. Anyway, so that's when I created Francis McGrath, the satirical character, and then went to war satirically with them. And this went on for months. And what I was doing is taking screenshots of all of their activities and then circling all these professors' names and then reposting them and satirizing them and calling myself a hateful harasser and a genocide denier, on and on and on and on and on. This went on for months. Anyway, so then I kind of demobilized the mob. Like, they did start to, it seemed to me it was fizzling out because they were just being mocked if they did anything. But now we've moved into another phase, which I cannot talk about because just to even say what is happening will subject me, I could be disciplined by my employer even to discuss what the new tactic has been from my colleagues who, and then they got a petition. Before that happened, they started a petition to get me fired. 6,000 people signed that. That didn't work. So then now they moved on to another tactic, which is very, very alarming because it's secretive and it's along the similar lines of what's happening to Mark with these kind of star chamber type tactics. So that's a whole new ball game, and that's now going to stretch through the whole of the winter term, basically.
Yeah, probably, yeah, or longer. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, all I can say is that I am so jealous of Francis because, and I've actually blogged about this. You know, I started a blog 4 years ago, 2016. And, you know, I started it looking for death threats because, you know, you get into the twilight of your career, you
need some action.
Well, I am, turns out I found out I am famous, but not in, a prophet is never honored in his own country. Apparently in Europe, my stuff in philosophy of war is actually, you know, quite famous, and Homeland Security has me on their reading list and stuff like that. But other than that, you know, I mean, I'm just a nobody, which is fine. Like, I've never sought fame or fortune, right? But, you know, especially with this growth of political correctness and so on, I just, you know what, just know, I want a mob. I want at least, you know, a petition to have me fired or something, you know, to kind of, you know, get some recognition.
Which is kind of funny, Paul, because I've read your blog and I love it. And I have to admit that pretty much every day when you write something, the woke mob should be going after you.
But they're not, Mark.
They're not.
They're not. This is, and what pisses me off is that Francis, okay, who says perfectly reasonable things, okay, she gets mobbed, 6,000, you know, signatures to have her fired from the university. I get nothing. You know, not only do I not get death threats, which I think is really the sign of you've arrived, right? Is you can get some death threats, you know, threats. I want to emphasize the threats. Pam doesn't actually want me killed yet, you know, but you know, I have said, if you go through my blogs, I mean, I'm far more undiplomatic than even Francis, you know. I mean, you know, and I get nothing, you know, and so I'm just jealous about the whole thing. But
well, you know why, Paul?
Why?
The Jews control the media.
Oh, okay, see, that's just it. I think this is what I was saying to Francis before we came online. I have this, unfortunately, you know, I've got the J card, right? And so if anybody, they're afraid if they come after me, I'm going to claim anti-Semitism, right? I mean, you know, I got the J card to play, you know, and you know, I'm, you know, the child of Holocaust survivors and all that shit, all of which is a lie, but that doesn't matter. The thing is, you can play the card, right? And, you know, I'm looking at the faces on this screen. None of you can play, you know, none of you have a race card to play, okay? I mean, it's zero, you know, but I at least have that. And I do wonder whether whether that protects me to some degree. I'm not sure it does, but maybe it does. I don't know anyhow. But my story it's not nearly as dramatic as you guys. Really very, very undramatic, in fact. So what happened was that there's a guy in the, we have an Indigenous Studies department, okay? And everybody in the Indigenous Studies department, they're all white. Just, okay, there's not a single Indigenous person in the Indigenous Studies department. But anyhow, this one guy whose name is Paul Mackenzie Jones gave a talk that I happened to attend. And the talk was your typical, you know, I mean, it was nothing particularly, you know, it's the kind of grievance literature you find, you know, which is fine, right? I mean, there wasn't anything he said that I disagreed with, or, but I thought because I had written on Indigenous studies and so on, so I sent him a perfectly, you know, perfectly reasonable, just kind of a blog entry. It was about 7 pages, in which I, you know, pointed out, you know, some certain things that perhaps, you know, you might want to attend to, you know, as one white guy to another white guy about Indigenous people. But it was like a courtesy, you know, I mean, as far as I was concerned, you know, you talk about this kind of naivete. So he read the thing and he got pissed off. And he sent a letter to the dean at the time, right? Complaining, you know, this big long letter saying, you know, and the dean kind of sent me a letter saying, you know, that because I was accused of racism, right? And so the dean sent me this letter and said, "Oh, I think it is." You know, by the way, the article is called "In at the Risk of Sounding Racist," which, by the way, is on my, it's on my, I mean, you can read it, right? It's, you know, anyhow. So the dean at the time, you know, decided that he was going to call me in for a meeting, right? Well, I was in Europe at the time, you know, until the COVID thing hit. Pam and I live in Italy during the summers, right? Not now because of COVID, but anyhow. So I couldn't actually have the meeting until the following fall, right? So which was the fall of 2019, I think. Was it 19 or I think it was 2019. By the time that meeting took place, that dean disappeared, okay? And there was a new dean, okay? And so we go to the meeting, you know, and the new dean kind of sheepishly looks at me and says, "Well, okay, there's nothing racist in this, you know, right?" But then he wants to have a conversation about, "You hurt this guy's feelings." Yeah. He said that. By the way, I record these meetings, okay? You know, I will not have a meeting with administration that is not recorded. I record them. And what he said is kind of like, okay, so you haven't violated any, you know, any rules or anything like that, but, you know, you hurt his feelings, you know, you shouldn't. He actually said this. And I was not terribly receptive to this comment, you know, right?
Boy, oh boy.
So anyhow, that was the end of that. Okay. So that, you know, but I have been earlier, you know, way back in 2016, I was sucked into the Tony Hall affair. Let me just explain the Tony Hall affair. So first of all, I just want to say for the record that Tony is an asshole. Okay. I just want to make that clear. He's not my favorite person. And he, you know, he's a conspiracy theorist and he's probably QAnon and God knows what else. Anyhow, but he really is a bit of an asshole. But nevertheless, they went after him because, you know, he's a 9/11 truther. And one of the claims about 9/11 truth, right, is that it was an inside job, or at least Mossad, Israeli Secret Service, and the so-called, you know, anti-defamation, you know, lobby, you know, the Zionist lobby, you know, B'nai B'rith and so on and so forth, picked up on this, and they decided this is an anti-Semitic claim, which it isn't. But you know, I mean, I always said that. Listen, if Israelis pull this thing off, that just makes us even more clever than I thought we were. I mean, my God, I mean, we are smart people.
You are.
We are.
That's why you control the media.
Exactly. Yeah, we control the media, right? You know? Anyhow. So they went after him, and while he was in this situation, I must have said maybe maybe in one of these internal chat lines that we have or so, I must have said something kind of in support, not of his position, because I don't really give a shit one way or the other. I don't know anything about 9/11, and quite frankly, I don't care. But, I mean, to simply, to conjecture that 9/11 was a, Mossad operation to me is, and he also said, by the way, like after this thing started, he's an historian, he's a trained historian. And what he said was that, look, I think that everything should be on the table to be re-examined, including the Holocaust. Well, how can you, if you're how could anybody deny, that it's perfectly legitimate subject to go on the, I mean, if I was an historian, I might go after and say, well, and some historians have, the Exodus is probably a myth, it probably, well, so, or,
No, not the Exodus.
No, the Exodus might be a bit of a myth. And you know what? I don't think the tomb was empty. I do not believe. Like, oh my God, I've just, in any event, look. So at this time, Tony was first of all, I mean, he got thrown under the bus by the Faculty Association, which sounds to me like a common feature of faculty associations. They just are not, they're quislings, right? But you can understand, right? Because these are people who get into the Faculty Association and they're hoping, well, a couple of years later, maybe they can get into senior administration. I mean, it's very common, right? In any event, he got thrown under the bus by the Faculty Association. He was very upset. I mean, the difference is that, I'm looking for controversy, right?
Mm.
I want to end my career with a bang, not with a whimper, but Tony apparently was, quite upset about this whole thing. And because he saw this little note in my, in something that where I was kind of supportive, he decided that I was his best friend.
You were his best friend.
So about 5 o'clock one day, he comes over, 5 o'clock, just before supper time. And, to show me some documents, and we talked, and we fed him, and off he goes. And then the next day he comes back with another piece of paper, something like that, at 5 o'clock for dinner, right? And, but the thing is, he's got tears in his eyes, he's, and you give him a little hug, okay, Tony, The next day he comes over at 5 o'clock, and I said, oh, something else? No, he said, I was just lonely.
Yeah.
So I was telling Francis that one day we were that Pam and I are just coming back from grocery shopping or something like that. We see Tony going up the front steps to our house. Pam says to me, go around the block until he leaves. And we just felt terrible about it. Here's a guy who's desperately needing some support, and
And no one else stood up for him at Lethbridge. No one.
There's a guy, Atif Barmal, not Barmal, Atif, and he was in the religious studies department, but you see, Atif was kind of supporting him, but the idea that Atif, being Muslim, supporting, Holocaust, not a Holocaust denier, but a 9/11 truther, the cosmetics were terrible. And Atif and I talked about this, and I said, you shut up, because you're not going to help at all, right?
Yeah.
Whereas a Jew coming out in defense of, would be, anyhow. So we stood behind him. Finally, eventually they bought him out and he caved, right? And he, which I thought was, and then I kind of, like, don't go to bat for somebody who's not going to stay in the game. I mean, it just, I kind of from that. And then, like, no matter what you did for him, it wasn't good enough, right? Anyhow. But that's Tony. And Tony still wants to kind of, because I guess he reads my blogs and sees that, I'm as politically incorrect as he is, or, well, of course, he's kind of, it's a odd combination of what Tony is.
Yeah. He's sort of woke. He's like into the social justice stuff in other ways.
Not working on it. Anyhow, so my story is so much, really mild, compared to the rest of you guys, right? And I do think that the university, even though they could, I mean, I've done things far more offensive than either any of the two, Marks or Francis. I don't think they want to come after me because I think they know that I have no reason to cave, right? I mean,
It's the Holocaust all over again.
the Holocaust all over. Well,
That's gonna happen, like it's more Holocaust.
but like I'm not worried about losing my job because look, I'll be 71 years old in another week. I'm financially fine. I don't have to worry about anything like that. I mean, I'm not feeling vulnerable. I do, however, understand the vulnerability of people who are in that position, who are tenure tracking, or maybe they're even tenured, but they're, like, just because I'm not personally worried, and in fact, I'm kind of trying to invite some, doesn't mean I'm not worried about academia. Now, I should say that Pam, who does almost all my research for me, especially in the stuff that she's doing for Mark, she is far more alarmist about the situation that I am, because I've been around for so long. Because these things come and go, and so we just have to kind of endure it for a little while, and it'll pass, and so on. She's not so sure, and this might, in her mind, this might be something that goes on for another decade or so. I mean, who knows, right? So I'm trying to be as not just sympathetic, but I guess as supportive as I can be, not of myself and people my age and my situation, right? But rather, people like, well, most of you guys are, like pretty, not totally invulnerable, but I mean, you think of people like, Shepard, or Lindsay Shepard or something like that. You look at people like that who are wanting to have a career, and you look at the chill that's put on them, and because that's my worry. My worry is the chill. My worry is not that they're going to fire Francis Widdowson, or that they're going to fire Mark Mercer. I'm not worried about that. Although maybe I should be. I'm not really.
One of us isn't.
Yeah, I'm not worried about that, right? I'm worried about, because I don't think either of you can be affected by the chill. I certainly can't, but I am worried. I'm very worried about people like Lindsay Shepard and new colleagues trying to get into the discipline. Anyhow, now what I'd like to do is turn to and get some advice from Kristen, because apparently you know stuff.
I've had experience and I know stuff, yes. I mean, maybe I should just back up and say that I was trained in the cult. So I have an undergraduate degree in sociology, a master's degree in sociology with a focus on law. And then I went to the University of Toronto Center of Criminology, where they have they've got a criminology side and a socio-legal studies side. And so, my research kind of blended in both of those types of spheres. So I spent 14 years reading classical sociological theory, cultural Marxism, post-structuralism, critical race theory, post-colonial theory, feminist theory. So it's the language that I speak. And at a certain point,
Kirsten, you must have started when you were 6, because you only look.
No, I didn't. I didn't. Thank you.
That's supposed to give me points, by the way, but
Yeah, it gives you points. Yeah.
Thanks.
So anytime anyone references a particular book or theory or journal article, I know it and I've read it. Eventually, I became chair of a sociology department, the same one that I did my undergraduate degree in. So I was a chair for 3 years. And then I was also happened to be on the union executive at the same time, where I was the vice president. So, I have a legal background. I spent a lot of time reading legal cases, and working as a chair gave me kind of a glimpse of what goes on in administration, right? Because I was also on a number of different committees, and then also being vice president of the Faculty Association and working with a very good friend of mine who is a lawyer, who was the grievance officer, to essentially get faculty members out of trouble when they're faced with these types of situations, right? So, and I've been in my own scraps as well, and I've managed to win all of them, which is good. And I kind of know the tactics, not the tactics, but the strategies to kind of use. And freedom of information requests are always a good thing to file if you suspect that something's up, because they can give you kind of an insight into what might be going on in the background. And so, for whatever reason, I find myself in a position of kind of having this expertise in, I guess, what you might call university law, or, and I mean, I'm not a lawyer, but, you know,
Okay.
I'm an expert in what the Star Chamber is going to look like once you get there. I was really, you know, I was lucky to work with good people in a good union, you know, that really did their best to ensure that the administration would be held to the procedural fairness requirements and so on and so forth, right? But
Can I interrupt you for 1 second?
Yep. Yep.
Is the dog snoring? Is everybody?
Oh yeah, I can move him. Sorry, I'll move her. Hang on 2 seconds.
No, I got
Come
3
on.
dogs in the house right now. I just want to make sure it wasn't mine. Oh my God.
Poor
Look.
dog. That was kind of atmosphere. It was.
Oh, well, I
It
was
was when someone had fallen asleep.
I'm looking at the screen and nobody's asleep, so I'm wondering what the hell is it? But usually it's my dog who lives under my desk and is snoring and really loud, you know. Sorry.
Sorry about that. I become immune to it because she's there all the time. I meant to move her.
Oh, she's a sweetheart though. I'm a dog.
Yeah. Yeah, she's awesome. She's great. So, well, where was I? Maybe just the observation that I can make is that these policies are being used as a weapon. They're not being used for what they're intended for. And for whatever reason, university administrators don't see this, don't want to see it, can't see it, are afraid of government oversight and that they're going to be somehow punished by the provincial governments. They're concerned about funders, of course, right? So there's sort of, all of these various things that kind of sit over top of university administrators who are already kind of indoctrinated into what we call diversity managerialism, right? So that they've commodified diversity. And academics, of course, are well versed in, philosophy, political science, sociology, all of the various disciplines that understand social processes and social dynamics and have been examining these things for, many decades. And, you sort of get someone who's a human resource, person in a position of human resources authority, and they really don't have a clue, right? Like they're just looking at this policy and thinking to themselves, I've got this obligation to ensure that the university conforms to the policy, and they really don't have the capacity to understand the dynamics, the political and ideological dynamics that are going on. And then I think they just get scared because they haven't managed, or they haven't figured out how to manage the flack factor. And what's interesting is that, in every case I look at, they double down, and they double down in the dumbest ways, and they lose, making themselves look worse in the end. They lose students, they lose their alumni donors, their enrollments go down, their reputations go down, right? So I'm kind of having a difficult time. I talk about this a lot, like, why are they doing this? I don't understand why they're doing it.
So
other than that they are aligned with the war.
So Kirsten, just to ask you a question about that, I think it perhaps might be better to, or help to shed some light on this by looking at the cases that never get to them losing or winning. So, like, I know of cases myself, like I am a fighter, a serious fighter built up through 20 years of fighting. So I am going to fight. And the fact that I'm now being, subjected to all this is rather frightening that they're going to do that. But I know of several cases where it never ever gets to that stage. The person is very afraid. They just knuckle down. They just say whatever they can do to just get the university off their case. And then, as Paul has mentioned, the chill of people knowing that this could be a possible scenario, just stopping people from even fighting at all in the first place, or even doing anything. So
Well, and the thing too is that, you know, the unions are uneven on these questions, and their job is to make sure that you keep your job, in a sense, right? And part of what's going on here is you have to actually be willing to lose your job.
Mhm.
Right? You have to be willing to lose your job to stand up for,
Yep.
right, the principles that we're fighting for, to maintain the institution and its, right, the
Yep.
purpose of the institution. And so there's always this, as in any legal process, there's always a plea bargain. And I've noticed that the plea bargains don't work in the sense that, and I'll come back to your point in a second, Francis, don't work in the sense that if the mob has decided you need to be gone, they will find a way to get rid of you, right? They will do it. And it usually has nothing to do with your scholarship, in the sense that they don't attack the scholarship, they attack a comment that is made, or an op-ed that's written, or a Twitter post of some sort, right? Like, I think that's a pretty common theme in North America now. You see it much more in the United States. There's more of them, obviously, right? But it's unfolding in Canada as well. And so because of the confidentiality requirements, when a university instigates a harassment investigation, faculty members are kind of at this mercy of only listening to the advice they get from their unions. And so in part what the unions are doing is they're trying to keep them out of trouble, right? So they're trying to get the plea bargain. But at the same time, I think faculty kind of don't get a broader picture of how policies can be interpreted, what the decisions are at the level of the courts and the tribunals, and that there's a strong argument to be made to push back against this use of policies in this way, and to push back against trying to use policies for what somebody says on Twitter, or to push back against, using a policy for a person in another province to send an email to a president saying that the faculty member violated the Nova Scotia Human Rights Act. That person doesn't even live in Nova Scotia, right? I mean, it's so bizarre that you almost can't even believe that it's there on a piece of paper, right? I mean, we had a case in Winnipeg where one faculty member said that another faculty member harassed him because they spoke badly of Winnipeg. I mean, talking badly about Winnipeg is a sport. It's a sport. There are songs written about it, right? It's like,
It's the coldest place on the planet.
Yes, it was colder than Mars one winter, which is partly why I left. I had to get out of there, right?
In the summer, it's all mosquitoes. I mean, you can't win.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But I think as well, the corporatization, the university corporatization is a major part of this, and this diversity managerialism, where we have conflicts that exist in society. And if we had true universities, we would be able to have those conflicts and the intellectual backing behind them come out and express themselves in a truthful way in the university. But because this would result in various kinds of explosions, and the university is concerned about its brand, they really are very nervous about that happening. And we saw that with Mark Hecht's case at Mount Royal,
Right.
Is that we need to have the conversation about what the impacts of Islam are on society, on the university, and the difficulties in talking about it. But because that would result in all sorts of chain reaction of all sorts of other explosive things coming to the surface, the university wants to kind of control that. Like, they want to get in, and they use, as Kirsten is saying, these policies. These policies are just brutal. Like, they are, they just go against all sorts of, specifying.
Well, they clash with the academic freedom protections.
They do.
Is what
They
do.
definitely
They clash
do.
with academic freedom protections. And you'll find too, is that, as Mark said in his meeting, the word academic freedom never came up. And I've been in meetings where, the union rep will say, don't mention the word academic freedom. It's like, what, why? Like, don't, red rag to a bull, essentially, right? You can't mention academic freedom. And so we're in a situation now where, I mean, I'm not so sure like that it's a motivated kind of thing. I think it's that we do have a culture war going on, and you've got the one side in that culture war that is sort of provisionally aligned with the managerialist goals of the institution, right? And they've achieved that power now. They're not the dissidents anymore. They're the ones in positions of power, and they're aligned very well with the managers. And the managers maybe don't really understand like what is beneath all of that. They're kind of understanding, well, what's the matter with diversity? It's a good thing. We don't want people excluded from the university, right? Which we all would agree with. It's the question of how we're sorting all of this out. And so, the cultural Marxists, for lack of a better word, they view their role as eliminating professors like us. That's their fight. It's not to improve society for any of the marginalized, to lift them up, to have the same type of education that I got as a student at the University of Toronto, or any of us got. It's actually the opposite in a sense, right? So they want to take us out because we're the ones that actually are trying to deliver the education. They only want the particular type of education delivered, only want their intersectionality or cultural Marxism and its variants to be the entire curriculum. And for them, it's our ideas that are a threat. It's the ideas that are a threat, and so they have to take us out. And they spend all of their energy doing that using university policies.
And I
words
think,
themselves.
And I have to take exception with, I really do not like the words, as I said many times to Kirsten, cultural Marxism. I do not think that is a good way of describing this phenomenon. I think what it is it's very, very closely connected to capitalism and the particular stage of capitalism that we're in, trying to keep the capitalist kind of machine going and to use the universities to be able to do that. And the conflicts now that we have with all the various ethnicities and genders and all this kind of stuff, this is applied postmodernism. And actually, James Lindsay and Helen Pluckrose, they recently wrote a very, very good book. It kind of maps the terrain out. I think it's a very, very useful book in going forward.
I haven't read it yet, but I'm going to, yeah.
Yeah, but they talk about postmodernism, applied postmodernism. So there's three stages of postmodernism: deconstructive postmodernism, applied postmodernism, reified postmodernism. Deconstructive was just Foucault, etc., ripping things apart and so on. Applied postmodernism is identity politics, basically identity politics, but still not imposing itself on everyone else. Like, it existed in its own realm and, gender studies departments and so on. And then in about 2010, we had what they call reified postmodernism, which is when identity politics asserts itself as all members have to accept it. They have to accept it's made real. That's what reified means. So identities, even if they're ridiculous, you have to accept that they're real. So the best example of this is trans activism. What's happening with trans activism is that the claim is that there is no such thing as biological sex. A ridiculous anti-scientific argument, which everyone has to accept. If you don't accept it, you are going to be hit really, really hard by all these mechanisms that Kirsten has outlined.
Francis, could you repeat the names you assigned to those three stages? Just for me.
Deconstructive postmodernism, which was in the period up until around the 80s. Applied postmodernism.
Thank you. Yeah.
And then reified postmodernism, which wokeism, what we call wokeism now, is reified postmodernism, which is this very aggressive, politically correct totalitarian vision.
Jonathan Haidt puts the what you call 2010. Jonathan is very Haidt rather is very explicit that he calls it 2013.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, and then and I'm, a lot of us are trying to figure out what are the well, if you're a historical materialist, what are the historical and material, what's the basis for these mutations and this change? And now here we are, where we have this ideology, diversity, equity, inclusion, identity politics, etc., is imposed itself in this complete totalitarian way on universities. And if you try and fight back against it, you are crushed by all these managerialist policies that Kirsten was referring to.
What I find interesting is that simultaneously there are two main cultural movements, right? So you've got the kind of the Marjorie Taylor Greene movement, the Trump movement, the right-wing movement, simultaneously rising at exactly the same time, that the stuff the woke movement, right? And it's, so, I mean, when Kirsten describes this as a culture war, I mean, it really is, but it's right now, it seems to be a pretty evenly matched cultural war. It's true that, that the woke are controlling the universities, but the unwoke, what do you want to call them, right? I mean, there's still, 75 million Americans who voted.
It's white identity, probably white identity politics is what it's going back. Like it's all identity politics.
Yeah.
There's white identity politics and then woke identity politics. Yeah. And we see the polarization that is forming when we need to get out of, we want to reject all identity politics. Identity politics is an unbelievably divisive and destructive form of politics, but that's because, well, the left, what calls itself as the left, has been completely taken over by postmodernism. There's no commonality. And Helen Pluck-LaRose and James Lindsay are liberals. Like they're reform. Well, Helen Pluck-LaRose is a very good example. Looking at the individual and so on. Jonathan Haidt as well. So that's kind of the liberal aspect. But then, of course, there's the historical materialist side of things, which is, of course, the actual Marxism. That's been completely sidelined as well. So where we should really be having an argument between liberalism and historical materialism, we're having an argument between white identity politics and woke identity politics. So there's no hope in this current paradigm for any better world that could emerge out of this. This is very, very disturbing.
Let me ask our resident sociologist then, because I am curious about this. This is something that Pam and I we're struggling with right now. How long do you think this will last? I mean, look, it can't last forever, Kristen. I mean, it can't.
Okay, well, I'll say two things about that. Pam's right. It's going to last for a decade.
Okay.
But one thing we need to realize.
Women always stick together.
I know. No, it's going to last for a decade.
Okay.
So one thing I would say, because I teach what I want to teach. I teach trans activism issues. I taught about hate propaganda. I grounded in the law, I grounded in policy, and I grounded in the theoretical frameworks out of which these ideas come from, and try to help students understand, right, the terrain. Mm-hmm. And I do it in a way that says, you got to figure this out for yourself. I'm not going to teach you that one particular way of understanding this is correct. I don't know which one is correct, but here's the lay of the land. And I've been doing that for a couple of years now. And a lot of students at first are like, what the heck is going on here? I don't understand what's going on here. Some react very negatively and try and take me out, right? Hasn't worked so far. But then a kind of small group of students will start to come and talk to me and say, I just can't speak about this. There's no way that we can talk about this. So there's a huge contingent of students who are already silenced. And I mean, if you're a student too, you need to be able to speak and make mistakes and work ideas out, right? I mean, everyone talks about a safe space. Well, that's really the safe space that students need now, is a place where you can make a mistake or stumble over your words or say the wrong word. And you're not going to be sent to the gulag for it by 5 other students who are going to go and report you to the associate dean. I mean, I've attended the bystander intervention workshops, and it's astonishing what they're telling students to do to rat out other students. It's shocking. I've attended the sexual assault workshops where they're telling people that you need to watch out for somebody flirting with you because flirting is grooming for sexual assault. Like, that's a direct quote from one of those workshops, right? And students are terrified. They don't know how to navigate. You know what I mean? They don't know how to navigate. And then, of course, they see professors being canceled for saying things that they agree with, right? They see it happening.
Yeah. Well, I think it's got a lot of, it's still got a lot of life in it still. And that's kind of the thing that scares me, is that I was on a podcast a year ago. I think it was IJ McCann's podcast. And I was kind of a little bit optimistic, because the Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women Inquiry had come out and had said that there was genocide against Indigenous people. And there was some pushback that was happening against that. So I thought, this is the first time I've kind of seen a bit of pushback. So, maybe this is kind of crumbling a little bit. Same thing with the trans activism stuff, where, you have the feminists who kind of started the ball rolling along this path. And now they're getting eaten up by the trans activists. And that kind of has created a little bit of space. But this is then we had 2020 come, and everything just all of a sudden just became this terrible mess, with not really very much opposition to it. It's kind of frightening when you see everyone just kind of sitting on their hands, worried. And I guess my own view is the only way to fight it is through organization. And that's why I have these logos here. It's not because I'm speaking on behalf of these organizations, but these are two excellent organizations that if we could just build them up at the university level, because you have to kind of organize at a university level so that people have their support at the university level, at the national level, which of course the Society for Academic Freedom and Scholarship is a good, very, very excellent national organization, and then build things up internationally, because it's not just Canada that is succumbing to this. Certainly the United States.
Yeah,
the
heterodox
UK,
is taking the place of
Yeah, and I agree, but I also think that this battle is going to be won in the courts, and that we have to be able to use the law. Because if you look, to some of the cases that have been unfolding in the United States and in Britain, the Tavistock case with the gender identity disorder clinic, that would never have been turned back if it hadn't have been taken to the courts. And so that's really the kind of issue for us as faculty in Canada, is sort of trying to figure out what that looks like, right? Because we've got a kind of a, I don't want to say it's a barrier, but it can be a barrier. And, when Mark says he's worried that his union is not going to take it to arbitration, that's the barrier, right? Because if your union has been completely infected with the ideologues, and what's more, they don't understand the law, because it's a pretty, it's an intersecting and overlapping kind of area of law, right? If they don't understand it, what they've got in their minds is, well, what's the big deal? They just, said a bad word and we can solve this, by, Mark just taking a letter on his file. And the answer to that is absolutely no, right? Like my view, and not everyone agrees with it, but my view is that actually you have to take every single one straight to the mats, right? You take it straight to the mats and you don't back down. You do not apologize. Unless of course you actually feel you're in the wrong, but for these types of cases, we're not talking about being in the wrong, right? No. And there's going to be a case one day that is going to help us as much as the Pridgeon case in Alberta helped students, right? We don't have it yet. We don't have it yet. Because most of the universities, what they're doing is they're paying out faculty members huge sums of money. Yes. They know they're going to lose. And they get to arbitration and it starts to become public, and they have to say the things that they've been saying in the star chambers behind closed doors. Now all of a sudden they have to say it out loud, and they want to avoid that at all costs. And somebody else pointed this out to me the other day, and it's one thing I want to investigate, but she wondered if their insurers are covering them for these gigantic payouts that they're giving to faculty members.
Yeah, no,
If I
this
can
is a
just
big
jump
problem.
in here,
Yeah.
I just wanted to say, I find it fascinating when you put a bunch of academics together, like we've done today. We often just say, oh yeah, okay, I got canceled. Okay, now let's figure out what's going on in society from an academic, logical perspective, which is what we've already started doing with this question of where is this going? And I too, I think Pam is right, Paul. I don't know if you agree with her or not, but yeah, I think no matter which level you seem to look at, whether it's like legal law or you look at Peter Turkhin's cyclical cycles of society, or you look at geopolitics, everyone is kind of saying the same thing, that we're at this intersection of all these different forces happening at the same time. George Friedman, Geopolitics, predicted this like 20 years ago, saying 2020 was essentially going to be the year when all of these independent cycles that had, say, 50 years or 80 years actually came together at the same moment. And it's going to take about a decade to figure it all out. So it's fascinating to see us talking about, different levels like the legal system or identity politics, or if you go over to geopolitics, it's all saying the same thing.
And I remember when I heard about your case, Mark, and it was like so shocking to me. I mean, the points that you were making were mainstream sociological types of observations. And it was one among many.
I called it banal. I actually wrote and said, this is a banal comment, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't want to insult you, but
because people are so afraid. Like, that was the thing, is no one else in Canada anyway would want to enter into that. And for you to sort of, it seemed to me that you were kind of unaware of what the reaction was going to be to that. And then because of course you were contract faculty, right? That's the other thing. If you had been a tenured professor, I don't think you would have got the same level of opposition.
Yeah, no.
Because then it would have been, okay, well, it was like your contract just isn't going to be renewed. And then the faculty association isn't going to bother with it, and you're just going to go away. Like that would have been. But if you'd been tenured, then it would have been, okay, we're going to be digging in for more of a.
Until someone came up with something to complain about under the personal harassment policy.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, he would have been okay for a while, but not very long.
Yeah.
And I mean, the other point to make too is that it kind of speaks to the decline in the quality of education that people are getting, in the sense that, I mean, maybe it's a couple of decades behind me. I don't know, but how anyone who has a university degree in the liberal arts wouldn't know that Mark's point is a mainstream and, like you said, kind of like banal point that is in no way attempting to eliminate immigrants from Canada, but to talk about what we used to talk about, which is now, I guess, incorrect, but to talk about what does the good society look like. I mean, the Europeans are really struggling with what that means, right? How do we understand this? Especially since, well, maybe I won't go there, but I recently read Douglas Murray's book, the, what is it? It's the
Death of Europe, right?
Yeah. And I
kind of Madness of Crowds or The Strange Death of Europe?
Both.
The Strange Death of Europe.
Both. I actually assigned The Madness of Crowds to my class. And I also gave them Ayaan Hirsi Ali and Yasmin Mohammed, who talks about, she's Canadian, and she talks about the way in which the Canadian courts in the 90s essentially facilitated her ongoing child abuse in the home. And because of the kind of understanding that, well, your cultures just do it differently. So we're going to tolerate that kind of abuse for Yasmin in the home, rather than, right, attempting this kind of thorny problem, which is to say, okay, wait a second, what are our values, and are those values universal? And how are we going to work through this kind of thorny problem, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I can't help but notice that it's women and children who are suffering from this clash of kind of religious fundamentalism and what we would call, you know, Western Enlightenment values. Those are the people who are suffering.
Yes. And I think that postmodernism, this is the big problem, is that postmodernism has a relativistic attitude. That's what allowed, you know, which is strange. And this is kind of what is an interesting question about Helen Pluckrose and James Lindsay's piece, which is they don't really answer, but it's definitely clear, is how did it go from a sort of a relativist kind of position that you had to accept all these different cultures as being equally valid, to the reified form, which is you must accept the beneficial, like that's not a relativist claim, that you have to accept this as being valid, like everyone does. Not just like the applied postmodernism is each group has its own thing and they should be allowed to be whatever without being criticized. That's not what's happening now. It's now this Islamic way of doing things has to be accepted as being valid. And if you don't, you're going to get crushed. Like that. And the indigenous, like my area's indigenous policy is now like, and I you know, in terms of discussions about indigenous science is a postmodern position, that this science, which is not the universalist position, is science does not have an ethnic adjective in front of it. If you call it indigenous science, it's not science. There's science and there's non-science. But what we're seeing now with the reified postmodernism is you have to accept that indigenous science is a valid form of knowledge. And if you don't, you're going to be subject to all these things. So how did it go from a relativist kind of position to now the assertion that the marginalized cultures actually have the knowledge that we should all be listening to and that we should all accept? That is a completely strange twist that's happened, which still hasn't really been, I don't think, satisfactorily examined or understood anymore. It's been going on for the last 40 years. That's right.
Yeah, my problem with, look, I accept that certain cultural experiences may, certain understandings of the world that are at odds with other understandings of the world could emerge. My problem with indigenous science is that as soon as I ask what it is, there's nothing there. You know, I mean, it's not as if, you know, if there was something there that actually, if there's some kind of assertion, some kind of proposition that could be put on the table, that's fine. I'll put it on the table.
Have you read Ruth Gorlick's work?
Sorry, which one?
Ruth Gorlick, amazing, a botanist whose first name is Root.
Okay.
But he tries to give a sense of what claims and methods are properly described as indigenous in botany, and botany and ecology are the two areas where he thinks that much local knowledge is very penetrating and important and useful knowledge that he thinks can be taken up into science. Now he seems of maybe Francis knows his work better than I do.
I certainly do. And it's coming out like indigenizing the university, diverse perspectives.
Well, he's of two minds, because he might, on the one hand, there is the sort of cultural proprietariness that he would want to respect. On the other hand, he thinks that these are complementary, but ways that can be integrated with each other.
Yes. Well, there is a debate. There's a discussion that goes on between Ruth Gorlick, who I know well, and Massimo Pigliucci, who is a philosopher of science and biologist as well. And they have an exchange in this volume, Indigenizing the University. Anyway, and this is basically what Root is talking about, is, as Mark said, is local knowledge, which is not indigenous. Like, that is, everyone has local knowledge.
Right. Right.
It's not
Sure.
it's not an indigenous thing. When you get into the indigenous part of it, that's when the spiritual beliefs, it's about the spiritual beliefs of indigenous people, that they have this sacred connection to the earth. And in fact, anyone who questions that is going to get crushed, because it's part of this reified postmodern.
In philosophy, that's called Gnosticism, right? This idea that there are,
But I think Francis has two complaints, and I share only one of them. Francis's two complaints. On the one hand, what's called indigenous knowledge doesn't meet the criteria that we understand as scientific, and therefore doesn't belong in the university. I reject that. Any ideas belong in the university, and bring it in and talk about it. The other thing, the other point that Francis makes, the one that I agree with, is the move away from criticism and the move towards celebration. So when they say, well, let's use the university in order to make people vibrate more alive with their cultural heritage, improve their life in this way. And to do that, we have to celebrate their identities. We can't do anything that might disturb them. Well, that moves away from the university as a place of criticism. So when Root wants to bring into his courses local indigenous knowledge, fine. And his students free to talk about it. I mean, I've made this point when I was writing about the teaching of evolution. What we want our students to acquire is an understanding of the idea that species evolve by means of natural and sexual selection. We don't care whether they accept it or not. That's not our business.
Francis, the two philosophers on the panel are agreeing with each other against you on this.
No, well, I don't. First of all, I don't. It's not that I don't. I think that in local, there's no problem with local knowledge at all, and that's what Massimo says, is that this is fine. Everyone recognizes this. The problem is when it's cloaked in this ethnicity, which then, if you criticize it, you are accused of being a racist. Like that's the problem.
I say let it be knowledge, ethnicity, but also let it be criticized.
But the thing is that indigenous spirituality, this can be part of the university. There's no problem, but it's going to be within the religious studies realm or the anthropology and so on.
But if a biologist wants to bring it into class for pedagogical purposes, or because the biologist thinks that this gets things right, then fine.
I'm not disagreeing with that. I think that's fine. Like, I think that in a science class, you just use scientific methods to try and figure out why things are the way they are. But if you look at Root's stuff, if you do actually get at what he's talking about, it's like the squirrels chewing on the tree bud, as an example. Like, Root does things like, I've learned more from indigenous elders than I have from any botany textbook. What? I pick up a botany textbook and I see meiosis and mitosis and photosynthesis and cell structure and everything. And what he's got is the squirrels are chewing on the tree buds, which anyone who watches the squirrels running up and down the trees all day can observe. It's just a basic observation. So, Root is pandering, my own view, is he's pandering to political things, but there's nothing wrong with that. Like, that's and in fact that probably would be quite useful in a grade school discussion about how we start with our observations and then we develop more systematic methods and then we build theories in scientific kinds of disciplines to test and so on. But that's this is kind of the type of information that Root is putting forward. But I think certainly as a way of looking at how science develops, that would be very important. But there's nothing indigenous about it. It's just local knowledge that anyone who's living in a particular area can acquire by observing things. But that's a totally different thing than scientific methods and theory building and testing of theories and so on that is going on. But because of, reified postmodernism, you cannot question the whether, you can incorporate indigenous star knowledge into an astronomy class. That you cannot even question. Like, this is
I'm all in favor of trying.
This is pre-telescope, this knowledge. It's not.
Well, the Herschels were pre-telescopes too, weren't they?
It's like we've advanced. Things have advanced with the telescope, with the invention of the telescope.
Well, we have University of Lethbridge has our own Little Bear, who's convinced, who gave a talk in which he said that indigenous people discovered the quantum mechanics.
Oh yeah.
Long before.
Because of their verb-based languages.
Yes.
Instead of their noun-based language.
Right.
Nonsense. This is nonsense. But anyway, you can't say that. That is seriously not allowed in the university.
Thought crime.
A thought crime has just.
I wanted to ask Kirsten a question or two, if that's okay, Paul.
Go ahead. No, you can't.
The moderator. I was just wondering why only a decade, Kirsten? I
guess I was sort of thinking about how much longer I think I've got in this.
I'm quite pessimistic about it. I think that this is a very large change, and it seems to me that our task is to try to articulate valuing understanding for its own sake, so that it might, in little pockets here and there at universities, survive 2-3 generations and then be available for the 4th generation if things change, if it comes back. I think the university is a very fragile institution, and it's a very strange institution. It's not one that we would think that humans would create. Typically, when someone gets a good idea, what happens is that disciples form around them in order to protect it and extend it within that, and we get schools. Whereas the idea of a university is, well, I've got a good idea, now criticize it, take it away, make it, find out what's wrong with it, and then pass that on to the students. And this is a very difficult thing for people to do, and the task of undergraduate teaching in many ways is to initiate students into something like the critical attitude, to be able to take elements of their identities, hold them at arm's length, take them as theses, put them on the board, ask what are the arguments in favor, what are the arguments against, what are the arguments in favor, the arguments in favor, and on and on. And I think that this sort of taste has always been a minority taste, even in universities. But it's being driven out and driven underground even more so lately. A traditional view of the university is that one of its main functions is to create the next generation of the intellectual and managerial and professional elite. And part of what that means is bringing people into the preferred ways. Now, the preferred ways are different than they were before, but that's still, I think, the function that our university managers take the university to be a prime function of the university. And the specific content is being generated by people who share the means and ends of contemporary social justice movements.
'Twas always thus, in the sense that universities, sometimes I get a little irritated when people talk about kind of the fundamental values of a university as if somehow, universities were, in this continent, were begun as theological schools.
This is my point, Paul.
I know. And so there was always an agenda. And I think of this idea about academic freedom and the very kind of ideals that we think about, you know, it's a place for, you know, to work this stuff out. That's actually a fairly recent development, and it looks like it was a short-lived one, right?
No, it was a recent development. It was a recent development in its flowering. I think it's always been there, but it's always been a minority.
And it was always only ever in a small part.
Yeah,
There
were certain
it was only
special places that were reserved for that. You
But
know?
it also had a social cachet that it doesn't have anymore.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
even among those who rejected it, even those among those who were up to something else.
Yeah.
So even among the scholar priests,
You know.
who were more concerned about saving souls than about contemplating understandings, still there was respect for their colleagues who were about that.
Yeah, the thing it's that idea of kind of being the professor being a you know, kind of a Osaged one, you know, like some kind of a that's
my favorite part.
Yeah, right. That's still more alive in Europe than it is in North America. I think it's really going to hit. I mean, for example, all my foreign students, you know, I tell my students call me Paul, right? Or as a joke, Osaged one. But my foreign students who come from Africa or Latin America, they can't do it. They can't bring themselves to, you know, because their culture tells you that, you know, that you're this kind of, you know, you're on a pedestal. You can't, you know, deal. And we've certainly, I mean, I think to some degree we've encouraged that ourselves. I know I do. I just don't like to be called Professor of Eminence by my students. I mean, my name is Paul. You know, I don't want to have to call them, you know, Mr. Johnson or something like that.
Yeah.
You know? But maybe, you know, we can. But I do have one colleague, by the way, who insists, do not call me by my first name. You know, right? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that it's, well, I think it's the methods. The methods are the important aspect. And that's kind of the scientific, philosophical perspective, is that, you know, anyone can be the sage or whatever if they are deploying the methods that are kind of universally accepted as the way to improve understanding. Increase knowledge and improve understanding. But I think we certainly have lost, well, as I said, I don't want to keep harping on this, but I see postmodernism as the thing that really, you know, put the nail in the coffin. You know, like, we can't talk about all the methodological discussions, the philosophical discussions, which require universality and common understanding, were broken apart by this kind of, we can't.
We also have to remember that it happened at a point in time when university policy was changing, particularly in Canada too, right? So that there was that, you know, the John Porter vertical mosaic kind of idea that everyone should be able to
I read that
go.
in the 19th, you know, like, I remember that.
Okay? Yeah.
We've got Carlson
John
where he
Porter.
killed himself.
Yeah. Right. So there was this idea that, you know, everybody should have the opportunity to come to university, non-controversial. But then the result was that universities sort of didn't really know how to handle that, I think, right? In the sense that all of a sudden you've got more numbers of people that you're trying to pull upwards, for lack of a better analogy. And there were so many of them that it just pulled it downwards. Like, I've taught introductory courses of 350 people. You're not teaching them to, and I try and teach them legal philosophy, believe it or not, right? And there's very little opportunity in that kind of, those kinds of structural conditions, especially when I've got students who are like, I have some students that are, I recognize immediately as so much smarter than I am, have insights that I would never have thought of, and other ones who I feel like, you know, really need to be in a therapist's office for a couple of years before they go back out into the world, sort of like, so that they can sort themselves and, you know, work along with the rest of us on what we're doing, rather than telling the rest of us we have to change what they're doing because it's stressing them out or making them feel uncomfortable, or it's too hard, or them not giving them enough time, or, you know, all of those kinds of things. So I don't know. I mean, I don't know anyone who would go work in a university these days. And most people I know who are younger than me are trying to get out, trying to figure out ways to get out.
Mm. Well, it's definitely a difficult environment, very, very difficult
Yeah.
environment. You know, and I think most of us got into it because we still had the old conception of the university, which was there, like that still existed. But I think, Kirsten, I think if I hear what you're saying correctly, is it's generally a lot easier to teach activism than it is to teach philosophy or science. So if you can
Yes.
give people a bunch, and then of course the emotional thing, and this feeds a little bit into Jonathan Haidt's materials, that human beings have a strong tribal kind of sense. Like this is part of our traditions, our primitive character is this tribalistic way of doing things, and if we can just kind of latch onto something and be part of a group, then we're drawn to that. But to kind of maintain this detachment where you're just going to listen to the different ideas and you might disagree with some and agree with others, that doesn't feed into this tribal mentality. And that's a very difficult kind of, and you even notice, and you notice this especially I have with social media, is that it's very tribalistic. Like the whole thing is tribalistic, and you don't want to go against your followers, because then your followers will abandon you and now you'll just be by yourself, dealing with hostile forces on all fronts. This is a difficult thing, but the intellectual really has to try to, stand back a bit, not just prejudge things, look at the arguments, look at the evidence. And, universities used to have some capacity to be able to teach this kind of capacity, but it's becoming more and more marginal within the university system.
I want to throw out a question for everyone. There's this kind of Aristotelian argument that democracy is based on the understanding that everyone has at least a basic foundational set of beliefs or knowledge upon which we can debate different ideas. But we seem to be entering this period where basic ideas are kind of splintering or disintegrating. And does that essentially mean that democracy can no longer exist under these conditions? Just interesting. I'd just like to hear what everyone thinks about that idea. I mean, I have my own views, but.
Well, what are your views? What do you think?
I think our society, well, democracy has always been a sort of a short-term game. And I think we're probably coming to the end of it. The next 10 years, we'll probably see a kind of authoritarianism that tries to corral all of these divisive forces under something sort of stable and cohesive. Not that it'll last very long, but, and then I was thinking about what Mark was saying in terms of the university almost being like this sacred, fragile thing that needs to...
I wouldn't say sacred, but fragile, yes.
Fragile, okay, yeah. We won't go to the indigenous part again. Okay, so fragile entity that will probably need to be taken care of through tumultuous times. And how we do that, I don't know. But I do have the sense that it seems like we're going into a more authoritarian time in front of us.
There's a new book by Christopher Caldwell about that problem.
What's the title of that?
Pardon me? Oh, well, it's I have it upstairs. I'm not going to run to get it. But yeah, it's brand new, 2020. So it's not his book about Europe from 2010. There's a new one. But what he does is he traces the evolution of administrative law, especially in the United States, and as it came through the civil rights movements. And he claims that administrative law in the States has formed a second constitution, often at odds with the first constitution, the Bill of Rights in the first constitution. Now, this is law that is made by lawyers and judges rather than by legislatures, and the legislatures are the politicians are happy to let the lawyers and the judges make law, because it removes law then from politics, and that helps them stay in office. They can say, well, it's not my fault, or I think it's a pretty good book, and I think that the general tendency is true here in Canada as well. Certainly with things like human rights commissions and human rights tribunals, and the reach of administrative law, I think, has been increasing and has been growing, and that it takes it out of the democratic arena. Takes much that used to be politics and moves it elsewhere. I think this may be one reason why I'm a little worried about Kirsten's suggestion about going to the courts. I'm not sure we would get the decisions that that we would like. I mean, it much depends on who the judges are.
Well, part of the point about administrative law is that it's kind of law at a distance, if you know what I mean. There are decisions that are made at the level of the institutions. And Philip Hamburger, another US legal scholar, talks about the administrative state, essentially. And in the US, they have something called Chevron deference, which we sort of do here, in the sense that if you think about, if a university has a matter that they need to deal with internally, government will kind of recognize them as the experts to deal with it, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of the assumption that works through most of democratic societies, is that, you can't have a government bureaucracy administering a university, because we're the ones that have the PhDs, and we kind of understand how to do that. So it's delegated authority. So what we're seeing is that, I'll be interested to read Caldwell's book. What you see is that part of what happened in the United States with Chevron deference is that the courts essentially said, we're going to defer to I think it was an Environmental Protection Agency decision. We're going to defer to them. They're the authorities, and you can no longer come to the courts to ask these questions. That's a simplification. But that kind of happens in Canadian law too, right? To the extent that if a university tribunal makes a decision and you want to take it to arbitration, there's only a couple of prongs upon which you can take it to arbitration, right? The number one being procedure. So in the kind of same way that the courts work, where you don't appeal on the basis of the facts or the interpretation of the facts, which is a problem for us in universities, you appeal on the basis of an error in law or a procedural error, and that's how you make your way up, right? It's more difficult to do that in this area of law, let's call it that, in this kind of area of law, which isn't strictly administrative law. I don't think the lawyers quite understand it that way. But what that means then is that what we need to do is ensure that the employer has a procedure in place, or that you're watching the procedural stuff, but also that there's got to be a way to say, but wait a second, you have not demonstrated that what I have said to my colleague in the workplace has had any real effect in the real world on that colleague. It hasn't had any impact beyond her feeling upset or disagreeing with me ideologically, right? Because the courts still, as far as I can tell, demand that there be some provable harm. And so, I mean, I take your point, Mark. I think that it needs to happen sooner rather than later, because the longer we wait, the more there's going to be lawyers who occupy not only, positions in, big employment firms, they're moving into the judiciary, and we're going to lose the opportunity to assert that position that people ought to be able to disagree about what constitutes racism and what constitutes the use mentioned distinction when talking about words, right? Without being subject to administrative punishment, which is what this is. It's administrative punishment. And they're enacting the punishment on the basis of that ideas cause harm.
Well, I think ideas cause harm. But the harm hasn't resulted from a wrong. No one's been wronged, even if someone has been harmed.
And I'm speaking in the kind of the legal sense, in terms of, you know, you have to cause harm in a legal sense for there to be some kind of punishment imposed by the state on an individual, right?
And I think that's objective, right? That's kind of the legal sense, is that it has to have some
You
objective
have to establish that something happened to that person in the real world that interfered with their capacity to enjoy their workplace, to pursue opportunities, right? And that just doesn't mean, well, I like being at work. You have to actually show that there was something that happened to them. They were prevented from, you know, getting a grant or an assignment, like what happened to Mark, ironically, right? You have to be able to demonstrate something in the real world. As far as I can tell,
just being offended is not sufficient.
Yes.
it's in law, right? The law is still clinging to, right? The university cannot punish someone unless they can demonstrate through a fair fact-finding process, right, that what happened to that person had an impact on their life, right? Other than just, well, I might not get a grant in the future because so-and-so doesn't like me very much. We disagreed over a hiring.
But is that, again, is this the real world? Because what I can see, the people who are in part of this reified postmodernism thing say, by you criticizing, for example, Indigenous science, and my whole career is based upon, you know, putting
None of that matters in law. None of that matters in law.
But I'm just trying to get at it seems to me that just because I feel something, that's not any indication of the legal kind of threshold, right? Because it's subjective. I can feel this way, but someone in a completely similar situation is going to feel something completely different, and therefore the law can't really operate on that basis of this kind of individual subjectivity.
This is exactly what's going on inside the universities, right?
Yeah.
That's what's getting people into trouble inside the universities. I mean, faculty associations have actually written down in words that we're supposed to think about what the impact of our words will be on another person before we utter them. How we're supposed to figure that out, I have no idea.
Yeah.
Right? But so I guess to come back to Mark's question about the law, I guess what I'm saying is I think there's a short window, right?
Yeah. No,
in which we need to really take action to push faculty. I mean, if you look at some of the stuff that the CAUT says these days, it's just like, I don't know. But to push the law, if possible, to try to find an avenue, right, to get the kind of case that says you need to understand this distinction, right? I mean, it's the same distinction that people confuse all the time with hate propaganda. Nobody understands what hate propaganda is, right? And, you know, in Canada, you kind of do have this little move in a particular direction that says if hate propaganda harms values, it can be criminalized, right? If it harms values and it's likely to have like this impact in the future, then we're gonna, you know, prevent it from circulating in society.
I think that's precisely what Mark Hecht is being attacked for, right? Is that there's a sacred set of values that you're at least, you know, putting on the table, that you're questioning, and that makes it can make it actionable. I mean,
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I think that the whole area of hate speech and so on should not. This was a dangerous move
Very
that
dangerous.
should never have happened. I think that all those previously determined things in common law that are understood, like threats and incite, that's already illegal. Like those actions are already illegal. The hate speech stuff is a completely different kind of argument, which is and this is again getting at Kirsten's point about having to understand what the impact of what's one's words are going to be before you utter them, right? Like that if this results in this group being detested by the rest of society, then this is hate speech, something like that. So detestation and vilification, that sort of thing. But that depends on understanding what the climate is of the whole of society, which can vary tremendously depending upon the culture, right? Like if you have a very liberal society that, claims are made about groups and people just go whatever, they don't care, versus like very tribalistic kind of society, which, gets out the pitchforks at the first kind of utterance of some kind of thing against another group. It just seems to me to be an unsound type of like kind of development that's happening in the legal system to do that. And of course, not to mention, it being used as a weapon, again, not used consistently. It's a weapon to be used against unpopular viewpoints, against groups that are singled out as being particularly vulnerable and have to be
This is
protected.
why I think some of the satirical moves, right, that you yourself already made, and that's where they come in handy, because what happens is, now you can and it's not even a matter of pretending. You can like attack, some. I mean, for example, I've said, look, if you're really interested in what's important about diversity is not cosmetic diversity, different skin colors and so on. You want the argument for diversity, other than the social justice argument, is an argument that we want to bring in new perspectives, critical perspectives, in which case skin color's got nothing to do with it, right? I mean, what you really want is, like Heterodox Academy suggests, you want to bring in people who are on the right, on the left, and so I said, look, this business about even perspectival diversity, you're really not, because look, pedophilia is as much a sexual orientation as homosexuality, right? I mean, right? It is. So, if you want gays, in your class, you do want to bring in gay students and gay professors.
And pedophiles.
Then let's bring in a pedophile,
Yeah.
And the thing is, well, no, we can't do that. Why? Well, because we disapprove of that. So it's not, you're being selective about which perspectives you want, right? And it's not diversity of perspective. It's an actual orthodoxy. It's actually a reimposing an orthodoxy. We just want an orthodoxy with the veneer of different skin colors, right?
Yeah.
But I think that it's helpful to point these things out. You just kind of say, yeah, look, I agree. We got to get diversity of perspective. I want to hire, the next hire has got to be a pedophile. Right? I want diversity of, right? And let's remember this. That Romeo and Juliet was the story about rape, because Juliet was 13 years old. Let's remember that. You start doing stuff like this, and I think that kind of commentary, I'm hoping that kind of commentary helps. It's the kind of stuff that I do, but
But that's sort of satiric, I think it's kind of a satirical
it's your approach.
kind of
It's your approach.
Which is like I find is the most alarming, and this is kind of getting into Orwell's kind of this idea of the thought crime, right? Is that we need to be able to speak and to have that outside of ourselves to be able to properly think through things. But by removing your ability to do that, you're now trapped within your own brain.
That's right.
And I'm really worried about where this is going. Like I find it difficult, and you know, from what's happened, just watching everything that's going on, you really, you feel yourself, you feel it in your own head that, okay, I don't want to really put this out there because, but then you can't really, it's all this kind of jumbled mess. And actually Jordan Peterson was talking about this a number of years ago. I remember watching this interview that he did with Gad Saad about this, and that, you know, you have all these ideas jangling around in your head, and it's really through trying to articulate them that you can figure things out. And now, because we're having a harder and harder time trying to articulate something, we have a lot of kind of unformed
No, that's
thoughts.
right. But
And
you can mention Jordan Peterson, but you can't use him. Just remember that. I just want to make sure that's clear. Okay?
I showed the whole thing from the TVO
I don't know how
series to
Kirsten
my
gets away with
class.
this. I don't know how Kirsten gets away with this stuff.
I get away with
I
it
can't,
too,
I can't, I just, it freaks me out just even thinking about it.
I get away with it because I'm teaching at Lethbridge, which is like the most, the whitest. I mean, these kids all come from, you know, like Calvinist farm families. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
but
No,
that's
but
not going to last very much longer. I'm pretty sure that, you know.
I don't know. I don't know where, like, I don't even know where to begin. Like, I'm just, it makes me like I have a segment that I teach on, you know, the Charlie Hebdo assassinations and like, which I thought was a great topic.
Yeah.
And it's on TVO, and it has, you know, 6 different perspectives on, you know, this kind of how to deal with this problem. But then, you know, I could notice in the last year or so, you know, sort of people of with Islamic belief system getting more and more kind of aggressive and upset about this, because they didn't like the quotation that was provided from one of the imams in the UK, who was basically saying, you know, the prophet to us is dearer to us than our parents. If you're going to insult the prophet, well, you're going to be put to death, because like that, like, which is a view that does exist in the world, but because they don't like that view being out there, and then how does one, if you don't have your faculty association and your university administration backing you on trying to shepherd students through this difficult conversation, how can, like, I don't know how to go forward on those kinds of things. And Kirsten seems to be doing it. And I don't know how you managed. Maybe you just have a better way of doing it than I do, where I don't set it up well enough. Like,
I think it does. Look, Kirsten and I both have dogs, and that makes a huge difference. You know, like the other 3 of you, if you don't have dogs, no wonder you're so ineffective, right?
I don't have dogs, no.
You know what I do though is I try to show, like, I try to find other materials that aren't me talking, that kind of represent the landscape
Yeah.
as I kind of understand it, and
That's
say,
okay.
okay, here, and I think it works better because, you know, the students can say, oh, wait, those are ideas in the world. That's interesting. I kind of get it now. I get what people are talking about. I get what this.
That didn't help Lindsay Shepherd though when she had, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean.
And
Well,
this TVO thing that I do, I don't take a position at all on it. Like I'm saying, here's a group of people, they're putting forth.
Stay away from the hadiths. I've had the same problem. Stay away from the hadiths. Don't talk about the hadiths and the interpretations.
But it's
I would
like,
say
if
that
you've
that's
got
a bit of
person
a.
putting forward that perspective. Like, I'm saying to this guy, this Islamic guy, you know, hey, I don't know anything about this, but there's this imam in the UK who's saying this. So the fact that this imam is saying this, we
Yeah.
have to recognize that there are imams who are saying this. So how do we deal with this kind of situation? But it doesn't, because they're saying, no, you can't be showing that. Like, that's not acceptable to be doing that. So I find that very, like, that's kind of what scares me, is that I certainly don't think I want to go into any classroom at all and put forward my perspective. I don't want to do that. If someone else is going to say that, then fine, but I don't want to put forth my own view. I want to bring, as Kirsten's saying, bring together all these different views and let the students look at that. But if they're going to say, no, we can't have that view be heard here, which is sort of this kind of signals that I've been given, And
It's
this
all-
is
it's
now
all
a
luck.
really thorny problem.
I think it's just luck. I don't think there's any mechanism or means or a method by which one can stay out of trouble. Someone will complain, or no one complains.
I think you're right. I think it is a bit of luck.
You may, as Kirsten does, and Francis, and as I think I do as well, just put theses on the board and draw up arguments, and yet draw a complaint, or you may proselytize and not draw a complaint.
I think it also has, I think to some degree, I mean, I don't want to toot my own horn here, but I think to some degree it has to do with your, the bravado, right? So in my case, I cover an awful lot of stuff with humor. Okay. And I find that humor does, it's, even though you're using humor, the ideas actually, they do make their way through. But the thing is, that humor kind of protects you to some degree, right? I mean, not.
Well, I would have thought so too, Paul, 6 months ago. This,
Now it's dangerous.
Mark, look, you're not funny because you're not Jewish, okay? You can't, forget it,
People have said,
There we go again.
You must be Jewish.
How can we become Jewish, Paul? That's what I want to know.
Well, okay, so in Mark's case, he would have to get circumcised, okay?
Okay.
Again?
And you and the women would have to have a mikvah bath.
And we will be accepted as Jews if we do that. I heard that we're seen as not being real Jews even when we do that.
Well, yeah, I know, but
There are different ways that the complaints can come. The complaints can come from students. The complaints can come from non-academic staff members. They can come from professors. They can come from the outside world. And I don't know that we can have any good reason to think that we're doing something in the right way, such that we're not going to draw a complaint. I think that there are complaints and that they go the way they do is unpredictable.
yeah, I think Mark's right about that.
Yeah, inevitable. In the era of the Yelp review for your teaching, right? And if the Yelp review is a 0, do not recommend, and it goes to a chair of a department who's very bad at managing those kinds of things, it always goes sideways. Right.
Listen, people, we're up to 2 hours and 15 minutes already.
Oh, wow.
So
Yeah.
should we have, everyone gets to say their final words?
So I was just about to say, I'll just go around the table here and everybody just, have a final word. I do want to ask that those of the two of you who are still involved in a particular, that you do share the results when you can. For the rest of the group, that would be nice. I didn't bother pressing my record, but I know if anybody wants a record of this, that Francis has it. And I think we should do this again sometime. Let's maybe try to set something up for maybe another 3 or 4 weeks from now.
I think so. And there is an event which I wanted to just put forward. I haven't actually moved on it yet.
Yeah.
Which is mobbing. A Society for Academic Freedom and Scholarship actually is going to sponsor it. And it is going to focus on the Ricardo Duchenne case with Ricardo Duchenne.
Good.
Anyway, Paul, I was hoping you would participate in that.
Happy to.
Oh,
yes.
good, because this is going to be, especially at this stage, I have talked to Ricardo a couple of times. I'm currently embroiled in something which I cannot name, which is, but when that kind of the lay of the land becomes known about that, I would like to have Ricardo.
Name other unmentionables, other unnamables.
I would like to get at the mobbing, and so Ken Westhues, who is I'm not sure if you know Ken, but Ken is an expert on mobbing, and he did a lot of work on mobbing, to get him involved. And I think Kirsten was going to moderate that, but she still feels comfortable doing that. And then to get you, and maybe and Stink told me, and this is another one where I go, how do people get away with doing this? Stink told me that he tries to put forth the white identitarian arguments in his classes and gets his students to say what's his problem or what's the problem with his arguments. And I thought, whoa, you do that? Like, ooh, so maybe Stink would be, but I think that's you know, would want to do it too, but to try to allow Duchenne to you know, be involved, because I think I still kind of feel that was a terrible situation. That's sort of like Tony Hall, but Duchenne is not is someone who can have a discussion, whereas Hall is more difficult. Duchenne doesn't get upset, but you know, I to be honest, I don't even have a understanding of what really Duchenne's main arguments are, because they become sort of forbidden, like a forbidden zone.
Yeah. Okay, Mark Hecht, you got something you want to say before we go?
I just wanted to thank everyone for coming out today. This was really good. Paul, thanks for moderating. We definitely should do this again.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe if you're lucky, Paul, after some people see this, you'll actually get mobbed. Luck might be on your side. Who knows?
My one comment, you know, if I can talk on a turn here, is that I'm just looking for advice from the four of you as to how I can get my death threats. I mean, because I am so friggin' jealous of. I don't know if Francis, you never got actually a death threat yet, right? I mean, not a real, but you're close to it, and I want that. I want, you know, and I'm not getting it, and I'm pissed off, and I want some advice. Anyway, Mark.
Anyway, it's been a pleasure. Thanks,
okay.
Everyone.
Mark, Mercer, do you have anything else to add?
No, but is there a question or a thought someone has for me?
A thought?
A thought?
Yeah, I mean, is there something that you want to say to hear what I have to say about it? I don't have any last words, but I'm just wondering.
No,
if
we're
someone
sick of listening. We're sick of
I-
listening to you.
I have a thought about how it is we're going to move forward in a sense, right? I mean, I take Lisa Bildy makes the point that we need to build our own alternative institutions.
Mm.
And I'm not sure how we would do that with a university, but it seems to me that Canadians have not been, like Canadian faculty have not been especially good at organizing something. I mean, aside from SAFS and Rational Space, which is sort of, you know, they're kind of smaller, but we don't really have like a good national organization. Like, I don't know if it would be a FIRE or a heterodox or a free speech union. And I think part of that is there's a perception that we're protected by dog. She doesn't like what I'm saying. We're protected by our unions. And I don't think that's true anymore.
No, you're right.
No.
And so what I would like to see is a kind of broader conversation about some type of organization like that.
Let's put that on the table. Let's put Kirsten's suggestion on the table. I would have thought that SAFS would be doing that job for us.
Yeah,
But
and I think we could build that.
But it would have to be built on, right? Because the problem with SAFS is it's way too small compared to, I mean, heterodox, I don't know how many members, I'm a member of Heterodox Academy. I imagine most of us are.
Oh, but they're $1 million, multi-million-dollar organization. We need somebody that's an executive director. We need funders. We need to get people,
I agree.
you know, we need a legal team.
With respect to that, though, there are certain alliances I would personally, if I'm I'd like to discourage. And let me explain just one of them. The JCCF is a wonderful organization, but but they make no bones about their political affiliation, right? It is a conservative,
Yeah.
you know, and I think that does damage to their credibility.
Yes.
I really think it does.
Yes.
I know that they've been a valuable they've been valuable alliances and so on. My wife worked for them for a brief period of time. I haven't been a consultant or anything like that, but I think we have to be careful about who we associate ourselves with, because we do not want to become, associated with the alt-right or with the unwoke. I mean, what we want to be is just academics concerned with the integrity of the academy. And
I was following up because Lisa's point was about the Stop SOP campaign that she ran, and I kind of think through what she did, and I thought, well, you had all the emails and you were weren't working full time. Like she was sort of able to coordinate that whole thing, not so much about this JCCF, but it absolutely has to be a kind of nonpartisan
Exactly.
organization.
Yes.
But at the same time, it has to be organized in the same way that the Heterodox Academy is organized.
Exactly.
And we also have to have, like, Canada is a unique legal landscape.
Mm.
We don't have the same rights and freedoms that American faculty members do, right? There's a huge move now going on in Canada to essentially see us as working in private industry. Universities, private space. We don't enjoy charter rights, right? Inside the university. That's the interpretation that the lawyers will give you. So there needs to be a pushback on that, right? To kind of assert what Mercer is suggesting in terms of trying to, kind of maintain that kind of idea that no, academic freedom is actually good for society.
But I think the way to do this is that there's no reason not to use, I think SAFS is the backbone of it, but what needs to happen is as local chapters in each university, and I remember discussing this at a meeting once, and I think it was Clive who said, no, yeah, go ahead, go and form your own local chapter of SAFS in your university. But I think we could help go to each university and help those people in universities spread their tentacles throughout their university to form the basis of the sort of the umbrella organization. That's the kind of thing that needs to happen. And I think SAFS is a great organization that really has tried very, very hard not to be have any of these political kinds of problems. Of course, it's branded. It's
hard not to get branded. You get branded.
It's labeled in a way which is totally unfair, and it makes me really angry when I talk to people about this. It just happens that it's the woke people who are all the crazies who are running around. So you're going to have, to some extent, an anti-woke kind of stance, which is then, of course, smeared as being a right-wing position. But still, I think that is the way forward.
In other words, in order not to play politics, we got to play some politics. I mean, that's just okay. Thank you, everybody. Let's do this again in a couple of weeks. In the meantime, we'll think about Kirsten's proposal, about seeing if we can do something with SAFS to kind of expand it. Just want to thank everybody for coming on. This has been really informative. And
thank you. Nice to see you, Marks.
Yeah.
Nice to see you both.
Thank you very much, Paul.
Nice to meet you, Paul.
Okay.
Shalom.
Okay.
Okay. That's all.
Bye.
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 Bye.